What's going on, guys? Marco here with my 10 waiver wire pickups for week 2. Before we jump in, I want to remind you of a giveaway we have going on right now. If you want a chance to win a signed Devonta Smith helmet, thanks to our friends over at Pristine Auction, all you have to do is head over to fantasypros.com/contest and fill out the form and either download the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard app, leave a review on the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, TikTok, at Fantasy Pros. The higher number of actions you get, the more entries you are going to get, and you are not going to want to miss out on this. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you do not miss out on your chance to claim your prize. All right, so let's get into my waiver wire pickups. Now, I broke these out into tiers based on, how much fab I'm spending on these guys. Now, the first tier is 2 players, and you might already be ready to hear these names, but it's my 50% of my fab tier. And I know that seems like a lot. I like to be aggressive early in the week or early in the season with my waiver wire fab. And so the first guy on my list is J.K. Dobbins. Now, he blew up in week 1 for the LA Chargers, and I know fans of J.K. Dobbins, fans of football, could not be happier for him after a just injury-riddled early part of his career. He exploded onto the scene in week 1, averaging 13.5 yards per carry. Yeah, J.K. Dobbins is back, and if he can stay healthy, if he can keep this going into the season, he is a true league winner candidate at the running back position, and that's why he is in the 50% or more of my fab. Now, the concerns with his injury and, of course, the recovery from his Achilles tear are warranted, and that's why he's in that 50%, not 65, 75% of my fab tier. But if he is able to settle into that 12 to 15 touch range and be healthy for a majority of the season, he is going to help you win every single week he's on the field. He is the most explosive player in this backfield. And sure, I think it's important to note that he was kind of in a 50-50 timeshare with Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins, 13 touches. Gus Edwards, 12 touches. Now, Edwards produced 29 yards on those 12 touches, so that could be reduced. We may see more Kamani Vidal if he gets onto the field, but J.K. Dobbins is the back you want in this backfield, and he could be a league winner, 50% of your fab. And if you're waiver priority, he is my number 1 waiver priority, and feel free to burn that priority in week 2. Okay. The next guy we have to talk about, he was the kickoff to our NFL season, Isaiah Likely, tight end for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Likely got 12 targets, 111 yards. He scored a touchdown, and then, of course, the very end of the game, his toe stepped on the line, but he could have had his second touchdown. He is an absolute freak as an athlete. He can play inline. He can play out of the slot. There is so much to like about Isaiah Likely's game. And it's not just a flash in the pan. We've seen this before. When Mark Andrews is off the field, Isaiah Likely produces elite tight end numbers. In his last 5 games last year, where Mark Andrews wasn't healthy, he was the tight end 1 overall in points per game. That is not something to just dismiss as an explosion game, a breakout game. Like, it's the real deal. And sure, Mark Andrews is going to come back. He was on the field a little bit, in week 1, and we don't know all that's going on with Mark Andrews after the car accident this offseason. We were told he was healthy, but he is not 100% healthy. We can tell by what we saw on the field. But even when Mark Andrews is 100% healthy, he gets onto the field, the Ravens are not going to keep Isaiah Likely off the field. He's going to be used in the slot. Like I said, he could be used in line as well. He is probably going to be the wide receiver 2 at worst, and maybe even the tight end 1 for this offense. 50% of your fab is not too much. He is a league winner at the tight end position, at a position that we've been talking about can be deeper, or it has been deeper this year than in years past. We had a dud week for the tight end position. Isaiah Likely is worth the fab. All right, my next tier of players is that 10 to 12, maybe 15% at the absolute most of my fab on these players. I will do them in order of how I would prioritize them, and then you can do with that what you will, of course. Now, the first one is Bucky Irving, running back for the Tampa Bay Bucks. He's a rookie, but he played in week 1, and he did exactly what a lot of experts were talking about he might do in the offseason. Now, he led the team in rushing yards. Rachaad White still played. He had a 20% target share, but he had Bucky Irving had a 6.9 yard per carry in week 1 to Rachaad White's 2.1. We know that Rachaad White's weakness from last season is he is not very good on the ground. You could say he is terrible on the ground. In between the tackles is not his thing. Bucky Irving, even with his smaller frame, has proved that he can do it both in college and in week 1 in the NFL. Now, of course, he's not going to ever eat totally into Rachaad White's workload. Rachaad White is the receiving back. He's Alvin Kamara-esque when it comes to receiving out of the backfield. But Bucky Irving has that as a part of his skill set. And I think that's really important for fantasy managers who are trying to invest fab in a guy like Bucky Irving. Because if Rachaad White goes down, Bucky Irving could step into true workhorse role. Now, I'm not projecting anything like that, but Bucky Irving is the only player in this tier that I could see getting up to that 15% of your fab for those reasons. Now, he might settle in that 12 touch range, maybe 15 on a good week, but that is enough to produce fantasy success, especially if this offense is clicking like it was in week 1. He could get some goal line opportunity, and again, he could take more and more snaps each and every week because he's that talented. And in Oregon, he showed us he can carry the workload for an offense. And I think that's one of the big things why he is the only one in this 10 to 15% of my fab tier that reaches that true 15% of my fab. Okay, the next guy on my list is, of course, a guy who a lot of people had written off, Tank Bigsby. Now, Bigsby outperformed Travis Etienne in week 1. And I know that felt crazy. You would think I was crazy if I told you that, 6 months ago, because he was left for dead in dynasty leagues. He did nothing in his first year in the NFL. And really, there was no hope that he was going to really take a step forward. We didn't see a ton of evidence of that. There was some talk in camp and, some people bought in. I was not super bought in. But they used him in this offense early. They used him often. And they both Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby had 12 carries in this one. And Bigsby outproduced Etienne on the ground by 30 yards. Now, of course, that's not always going to be the case. I think Travis Etienne is probably going to see more work and he's going to be more efficient as the season goes on. But it's not something to just ignore completely in fantasy football. Because here's the thing. Bigsby didn't just take over after Etienne fumbled in the game. He was in on the second drive of the game. So they are trying to integrate him into this offense more and more to probably help Travis Etienne have some long-term success for their season because they're trying to go into the playoffs, obviously. And so I think Bigsby is going to be a really nice back who can be in that handcuff plus territory. He's one of the very few guys who I think now has that value. And if you're thinking, what's handcuff plus? Handcuff plus, to me, how I define it is they're guys who are going to get on the field. 8 to 10 touches is probably going to be pretty standard for them. 12 touches like he had in week 1. I don't know if he's going to see that every week, but that 8 to 10 range feels reasonable for a guy like Tank Bigsby. And he's not going to most likely be in your lineup most weeks, but bye weeks, injuries, he's going to fill in. And if Travis Etienne were to go down, because of how good he actually did look in week 1, we're seeing actual improvement. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tank Bigsby step into a top 20 running back position if Etienne were to miss any time. So he's right in that 12% fab tier for me. Okay, the last guy in this tier, and I'm willing to spend 10% of my fab on a guy like Greg Dortch. Now, Greg Dortch, wide receiver out of Arizona. He was the top target earner for the Cardinals to the dismay of many Marvin Harrison Jr. Managers this week. And in week 1, he was one of the players who saw over 25% target share in his offense, while Marvin Harrison Jr. saw 4 targets. And that is just, it feels insane. It's not going to keep going that way. And that's why he's only down at that 10% range for me, because Marvin Harrison Jr. should take over that top target earner, which means Trey McBride is going to continue to populate that second target earner role. But Greg Dortch as the third option in this offense still has value, especially in PPR leagues. He is dynamic with the ball in his hands. And not only that, but this defense is so atrocious. It's in the bottom 2 or 3 in the NFL that they're going to have to throw the ball a ton. And Greg Dortch has officially established himself as a staple in this offense, even ahead of a guy like Michael Wilson, who ended up getting a touchdown in week 1. I would rather have a Greg Dortch in full PPR leagues because he's probably going to earn more targets than a guy like Michael Wilson, who's maybe more of a red zone threat. So when you look at this offense, sure, Greg Dortch isn't going to have that 26% target share, but he's going to slot in as the number 3 target earner for this offense, more likely than not. And in PPR leagues, that is value. All right, well, we're talking waivers, so I have to remind you of the FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. Now, you can get instant reactions, instant advice from over 100 fantasy football experts. And not only that, but you can discover both the weekly and the rest of season impact the waiver wire decisions you're trying to make will have on your roster. Head over to fantasypros.com/playbook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app today and get yourself some W's. All right, so the next tier is the 5% of my fab tier. Now, the way I look at this tier is if you need to, repopulate the end of your bench, the last 3 or 4 rounds of your draft, those guys didn't work out in week 1, and not only did they not work out, but they basically didn't see the field, or they were a healthy scratch or something. That can happen. So these are the guys I'm throwing to the end of my bench to kind of remove and kind of stay water at the end of my bench so that I'm fluid and my roster is always trying to get better. The number 1 guy on my list here is Justice Hill. He had a 54% snap share in week 1. He actually outsnapped Derrick Henry, and part of it was game script. Derrick Henry is notoriously one of the most game script dependent running backs in the NFL, even though he has been incredible. But Justice Hill saw 8 targets in week 1, only 1 carry, but he's going to be the sole passing down running back for this team. Keaton Mitchell, of course, he'll come back and he'll probably eat into that some, but I don't know if we see a healthy Keaton Mitchell for the entire 2024 season. I'm just not sure because of that injury was so gruesome. I don't know if we're really going to do that. I'm not a medical professional, so I can't say, but my money would be on Justice Hill dominating the passing down work for the Ravens out of the backfield. Now, I think really he's kind of stuck in this spot though. He's not always going to see 8 targets a game. The Ravens were playing catch up in this one. And if the game script requires that of the Ravens, Justice Hill's going to be involved. In the 2-minute drill, it was mostly Justice Hill. So I think that's why he's in that 5% category for me. If you need a running back, you just need a depth option there, someone who could step into a larger role if injury were to happen. I think Justice Hill's a nice piece, but I'm not at all breaking the bank for him because I think his opportunity is pretty limited as long as Derrick Henry is healthy. And I don't think the Ravens are going to be playing catch up too often. They just happen to be playing the Chiefs in week 1. The next guy I have to talk about on my list is Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, you might be thinking, the Giants offense, I don't want any pieces of that. And I get it. Daniel Jones he's not a good quarterback. We can say it. Giants messed up paying Daniel Jones. And that is a bummer for both Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, and the entire Giants skill player positions. But I think Wan'Dale Robinson does benefit in full PPR from the fact that he is going to be used as a safety net for Daniel Jones. The short area, just off the line of scrimmage, just behind the line of scrimmage area, that is going to be where Wan'Dale Robinson feasts. He saw 12 targets in week 1. He saw more targets than Malik Neighbors, their first-round draft pick, their top 10 first-round draft pick. And part of that is just because Daniel Jones just, 1, doesn't have a ton of time, and 2, is a poor decision maker as a quarterback. But that is nothing to just be ignored. He, with almost 29% target share, Wan'Dale Robinson in full PPR leagues has a surprising floor in an anemic offense, and that's not something you can always say. If you're not playing in PPR league, if you are still playing standard, then you can kind of ignore Wan'Dale Robinson. But in PPR, Wan'Dale is going to be the probably number two target in this offense. Malik Neighbors is probably going to end up surpassing him over the next couple of weeks, but that's not something that's going to make me shy away from Wan'Dale Robinson as a back of my end wide receiver. Again, with a lot of these guys, we've been talking about this. Waiver wires, injuries hit, and waiver wires is where you can find those bye week fill-ins, those injury fill-ins that can help give you floor or maybe those boom weeks when you need them. And I think Wan'Dale Robinson fits that category perfectly. And 5% of your fab should be more than enough to go get a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, because not a lot of people are trying to buy the Giants offense right now. And he could bring easy 8 targets a game as his average as we get on through the rest of the season. And that's enough value for me because of what he can do after the catch. He's a pretty good playmaker. He's a versatile player. Not overly exciting, but he can bring you a good floor in those bind situations. Okay, the last guy in this tier, we have to talk about Alexander Mattison. Now, people were in love with Zamir White this past offseason. I wasn't super there because of his limited role, and we saw that kind of come to fruition in week 1. Zamir White was mostly the early down guy. Alexander Mattison ended up being the pass catching running back, but he also did get some carries in this one. So the cool thing for Mattison is that even though he was kind of left for dead after the Vikings situation, he came to the Raiders and he saw 11 opportunities, 6 of those being targets in week 1. The Raiders offense is going to be continuing to try to figure themselves out. They don't know who they are right now, whether it be Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. I think that maybe changes in the relatively near future, but For Alexander Mattison, here's what you need to know. 5% of your fab's really not that much to spend, and we are always having running backs emerge. Running backs who have failed in the past, running backs who have succeeded in the past but then failed again. Alexander Mattison is kind of one of the guys who fits into that latter category. He had his moment. He wasn't able to do it in Minnesota, and now with the Raiders, he has an opportunity to see regular touches in an offense that is kind of devoid of purpose right now. And so he could find a lot of dump-off opportunity. He could be using the red zone really well. And if they're not right on the goal line, which I think would probably go to Zamir White, Mattison has a nice role. So the other thing you need to think about with Mattison is that if Zamir White were to go down, Mattison would probably split work with Dylan Laube, but I think he's going to probably be the favorite because he's the guy who's already on the field. So he's not a super high upside guy, but he could bring a decent floor, bye weeks, injuries, all of the things we've been talking about for the beginning part of this video. All right, the last tier I want to talk about is people to pick up after waivers have run. Don't spend your fab on them unless you're rolling fab all the time, or don't spend your waiver priority on these guys. But the first one is Alec Pierce. He blew up in week 1. And if you're surprised by this, let me pump the brakes really quick and just say this. This is who Alec Pierce is, especially in an Anthony Richardson-led offense. He has these boom weeks, and he will have a lot of bust weeks. Think Gabe Davis light, because I think Gabe Davis might even be significantly better than Alec Pierce. So if you've got some spot on your bench and you just need wide receivers, after waivers run, don't spend your fab. Don't waste your priority. Go see if Alec Pierce is around still and throw him at the end of your bench. I'm not overly excited because I do think one of the underlying things here for the Colts is that Adonai Mitchell, even though he only had 1 reception, he had 5 targets in this one. So if Josh Downs comes back, takes over the slot role, A.D. Mitchell and Alec Pierce will kind of rotate there on the outside. And so Alec Pierce is a really questionable boom bust option, but I think the thing for me is if I'm adding Alec Pierce, I'm doing it with the hopes that he can ride on my bench for the next couple of weeks. And if we see this continue, which I'm not saying is likely, but if we do, then you've got a nice option in the flex or, a bye week fill-in. But throw him on the end of your bench after you don't have to spend money on it, after you don't have to waste a waiver priority. And if it doesn't work, you can cut him in a couple weeks and you won't have to worry too much about it. You would have lost nothing. The second ad I think is important in this tier after everything's run is defense. Now, if you stream defenses, I love streaming defenses. I was big on playing the Chicago Bears defense in week 1. I think the LA Chargers in week 2 are going to be a great option. They play the Carolina Panthers, and the Carolina Panthers are one of the most just disaster franchises in the NFL right now. Bryce Young does not seem to have it. He doesn't look like he got much better. It's week 1, so we don't know for sure, but the Chargers offense is strong, and they could even get a couple turnovers in this one because there's just not a lot going for the Panthers. We could see, with their pass rush, we could see safeties, we could see, strip sacks and things like that. So I really like the overall defensive performance of what the Chargers could bring in week 2, but I like the potential scoring opportunity for the Chargers in week 2 as well. Okay, guys, don't forget to make sure you subscribe to the Fantasy Pros channel. Check out all of my work. Check out all of the Fantasy Pros teamwork. We are crushing it right now. Make sure you get everything you need to get those wins this week. And be kind, do good. We'll see you next time. Peace.